So let's read Psalm 120 together. In my distress, I cried to the Lord, and he heard me. Deliver my soul, O Lord, from lying lips and from a deceitful tongue. What shall be given you, or what shall be done to you, you false tongue? Sharp arrows of the warrior, with coals of the broom tree. Woe is me that I dwell in Meshech, that I dwell among the tents of Kedar. My soul has dwelt too long with one who hates peace. I am for peace, but when I speak, they are for war. So you'll notice here that this psalm, it says a song of ascents. It begins 15 psalms that come in a row, all with the title, a song of ascents. And you could say that those 15 songs are really a songbook for pilgrims. A special part of the Psalms set apart for those journeying up to Jerusalem as people of Israel from all over God's land, especially at the three great festivals that they were commanded by God to appear in Jerusalem before him. So these journeys were a great going up to Jerusalem by the tribes of Israel. And as we see in Psalm 120, that one is titled A Song of Ascents. But often in the plural, in the Hebrew, a plural can rather still be a singular, but it's emphasizing the greatness of that singular item. So in other words, it can be a song of the great ascent, of the great going up. And these 15 songs that we find here in Psalm 120 through Psalm 134, they are songs of the great ascent as the people of Israel converge and come upon Jerusalem to meet with their God. And it is possible to see these psalms, these 15, in groups of 3 even, in little mini triplets. And that's what we're going to do this evening. If we can, just briefly look at the first little triplets, Psalm 120, Psalm 121, and Psalm 122. And keeping in mind what we heard about this morning and longing for God's presence, well, in fact, that can be something that sums up these 3 psalms, and really the Psalms of Ascent in a way, because the people are longing to be in God's presence. That's what's bringing them. And it summarizes up these 3 psalms nicely. So as we've already been spoken to today by God's word about being people who long for God's presence, let's keep that thought in our mind as we look at these psalms together. And as we said, we're going to look at Psalms 120 through 122, songs of the great ascent. And this first psalm we're going to entitle A Temporary Resident. A temporary resident, someone who doesn't belong. We see that in verses 5 and 6, don't we? Where he says, Lord, the Lord is your shade. Woe to me that I dwell in Meshech. See, I dwell. That word there in the Hebrew is the word we sometimes use, sojourner. Someone who is a temporary resident. They don't feel at home there. They are living there, but it's not their permanent home. And he uses it again, doesn't he, in the second half of verse 5, that I dwell in the tents of Kedar. Verse 6, my soul has dwelt too long. He realizes that he's among godless people, really, we're going to see, and away from Jerusalem. And he's longing, in a way, for deliverance from this situation. Look at verse 2. Deliver my soul, O Lord, from lying lips, or from the lip of falsehood, and from the tongue of deceit. He's not talking about his own tongue. He's talking about those around him. And he's describing them all as kind of liars, in a way, who don't speak the truth. And he longs to be in a place of truth, Jerusalem itself. And so we're just going to describe this temporary resident in 3 ways. And the first way is that he's in distress. He's a temporary resident in distress, a deeply troubled spirit. We see that in verse 1, don't we? In my distress, I cried to the Lord. And it's a very real distress. Again, in the Hebrew, the emphasis in distress is on a very real distress, not a light one. And he picks it up in verse 5. He says, woe is me. What misery is mine? What distress is mine? There's nothing trivial about this distress that he's going through. His distress is one of being outnumbered by those around him. Look at verse 5. Woe is me that I dwell in Meshech, that I dwell among the tents of Kedar. These are a godless people in a way, and he dwells almost like a solitary tent among so many other tents, a kind of nomadic existence. And he's targeted within that context, within that setting. Look at verse 6. My soul has dwelt too long with one who hates peace. I, verse 7, am peace. He doesn't say I am for peace. In the Hebrew, I am peace. And they hate peace. He's a targeted man in this place. He's surrounded, as we've been saying, verse 2, by lips of deceit and lying. And he feels like one versus many. Look at verse 7. I am peace, but when I speak, they are for war. Can you imagine being this person in this context? It would fill you with distress, surely. And so the psalmist is longing for deliverance from this situation. He's a temporary resident in distress. He's also a temporary resident feeling the distance from Jerusalem, from that place that he longs to be. Verse 5, he says, woe is me that I dwell in Meshech. Meshech is identified as being up between the Caspian Sea and the Black Sea in our modern kind of geography. And the country of Armenia would be the right place for kind of Meshech. And they were well known for being a cruel nation, a cruel group of people. And of course, in terms of Jerusalem, they were a distant nation. And he says, I dwell amongst the people of Meshech. He says, he's kind of saying, I'm far from Jerusalem. I'm far from the courts of my God, far from his presence. But there's more to that picture, isn't there, in verse 5? Because he also says that he dwells among the tents of Kedar. Now, that was a people in northern Arabia. And so you've got the Meshech near the Caspian Sea, and you've got Kedar in northern Arabia. And he can't be in both places at one time. That's what we should recognize. And so he's being metaphorical. He's giving us a non-literal picture. Maybe he's in one of those places, but he's saying something about his distress and his condition by quoting that he's living in these type of places. Meshech means kind of long, drawn out. And we see in verse 6, doesn't he, that he says, my soul has dwelt too long in this place. I'm living in a place and I've been there too long. It's a drawn out existence. Kedar means dark. It's a long drawn out experience, and I feel to be in darkness in this place. Too long I've lived in a dark place. Too long I've lived among people of unclean lips, sounding like Isaiah the prophet. So this is the distress of a righteous soul in a wicked world. And this is the distress of a temporary resident. So are you a temporary resident? That's the question. Do you feel a distress over the wickedness around you? Or do you delight in it? A temporary resident is distressed over the evil and wicked and the lies and the untruths that are spoken. And the temporary resident has a longing to be in the presence of God. It's a longing that doesn't go away. It's stirred up as we see things around us. And the temporary resident will be singled out. If you hold to truth, if you are peace in this world, if you love truth, if you hold to truth, then lying lips will target you in this world. That's what will happen to the temporary resident. And you'll be marked out in these three ways of distress over wickedness, longing for the presence of God, and targeted by a world that does not accept truth and peace. And so this temporary resident cries out for deliverance, and God's deliverance will come. Verse 1. In my distress I cried to the Lord, and he heard me. There will be a delay, and that takes faith. God often delays, and it takes faith. But God has heard, and he will answer. And when it comes, God will deliver him, this temporary resident, from by the destruction of his enemies. That's what this passage here says. We see that, don't we? In verse 3 and 4. So our final heading in this little one is delivered by destruction. He says in verse 3, what shall be given to you? He's talking to these people with lying lips around him. Or what shall be done to you, you false tongue? He labels them all in this one kind of label, false tongue. What will be done to you? His answer, sharp arrows of the warrior. In other words, they will die. They will come into battle with God himself, and they will be destroyed. They are people of war, aren't they? Verse 7. They cry for war, but they don't understand what war they're taking on. And God will come as a mighty warrior on behalf of his people in his timing. And it will be destruction for the enemies of God, even as it is deliverance for his people. Sharp arrows of the warrior with coals of the broom tree. You know, after a battle, people piled up everything from the battlefield and they would burn it all away. If the broom tree was around, they would use that wood. All trace gone. Nothing left. The cleansing of the battlefield. So let's just stop and take in this truth tonight, dear brothers and sisters. The Christian's deliverance involves the destruction of the wicked. They come together. That's the day of the Lord. And the calling of the temporary residents is to be a voice of truth and peace before that day. That's our calling. To count the cost of holding to truth and peace in a place where people say we are for war. Because we don't wrestle against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers. We're to be an ambassador of reconciliation as a temporary resident, because that's what God offers right now. He is the God of peace. If anyone is here who doesn't know Jesus Christ, God offers you peace tonight. He offers peace through Jesus Christ. And the message comes through his church. And the church should be one of truth and peace. And this is the opportunity for the wicked to hear truth and peace and to turn from lies. Turn from lies and falsehoods that tell you God is not true, that Jesus Christ is not the Savior of the lost. Instead, believe that he alone can set you free by what he did at the cross.